incident of leprosy introduced to existence from the very beginning of existence. So I once mentioned Pikul Rebbe Lezer. It says because when the snake, the whole story with the snake with Chav and the Gan Eden, so it says, the Torah says explicitly that originally the snake stood on its two hind legs, and then the curse that the snake was, its legs were removed, you will slither on your belly, and dirt will be your fodder. That's what the Torah says. That was the punishment to the snake. And everybody you will bite man at his heel, and man will smash your head. The snake and the human being cannot coexist. There'll be a certain dislike or hate between the human being and the snake. But the Pirkei Rebbe Lezer says, if you ever take a look at snake, there are rings on the snake. On the skin, the rings. Those rings represent tzaras. That's leprosy. That because the snake spoke Lashon Hara HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it became a leper. So from then till the end of time, all snakes have rings on their skin, which represents tzaras. That's leprosy. Similar to psoriasis. Psoriasis is not leprosy, but it's similar to that. So that's why. That's the first. The second time is Moshe Rabbeinu, and the third time is Miriam. That's the third time. In terms of tzaras being mentioned, Torah for what? For speaking Lashon Hara. Now, it's interesting. The Torah tells us that, who was affected and impacted by Lashon Hara, the first creation was the snake. What does the snake represent? The snake represents evil. That's the evil. The fruit of the Eitz Hadas is Tov v'Ra. In terms of the unadulterated evil, it's contained within that fruit. But on the outside, who is the representation of Ra? That's the Sitra Achra. That's the Samach Mem. The snake represents that essence of evil. That's the snake. So we find that tzaras is a direct outgrowth. And what did the snake? How did the snake peddle and be impactful to bring about and infuse that evil into the human being? By speaking Lashon Hara Hashem. And what was the manifestation? What was the consequence of that expression of Lashon Hara? It expressed itself as leprosy. That's what we see. So we see leprosy is directly related to the source of all evil, which is the Nochash who caused Chava and Adam to eat of the fruit that contained the essence and the unadulterated evil which exists within existence, which destroyed existence. So therefore, if a person crosses the line too many times, what is the punishment? To indicate that, it's tzaras. Because the person took on the posture of the Nochash HaKadmoni, that original snake. That's interesting. The Chaim HaKadosh writes in Parshas Tazria that the Torah speaks about a woman conceives, she has a child, and it says you should circumcise. You should circumcise loso b'yom hashmini. B'yom hashmini timol b'sara loso. On the eighth day, you should remove the foreskin of his flesh. So there, the Chaim HaKadosh explains, cites the Zohar, that originally Adam was created without a foreskin. I've mentioned this many, many times. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted Klal Yisrael, after we were chosen to be the Adam, Atem Kriyim Adam, Vehem Lo Kriyim Adam, we were reinstated as the Adam, to have the profile of Adam before the Chet. So if we are the Adam before the Chet, Adam didn't have a foreskin. But what does the foreskin represent? That's the expression of the Ra, which he had ingested. So to temper it and to modify it, that it shouldn't be fully, totally overwhelming, consuming of us, Hashem says, is a mitzvah, you remove that foreskin. So when you cut away that orla, that foreskin, you're removing the evil, the representation of the Ra, of the Eitz Hadas. That's what you're doing. The woman, Chava, did not menstruate until shade of Eitz Hadas. The whole concept of menstruation only came about with shade of Eitz Hadas. We find the Gemara says that when a woman menstruates, she becomes slightly ill. She becomes slightly ill. She has certain issues when that the whole concept of ovulation is that menstruation is that the ovums are washed out and it's replenishment. It's always a replenishment of what? Of life. It's death and life. The whole concept of death had no relevance before the Eitz Hadas. So the woman only began menstruating only after the Eitz Hadas. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Klal Yisrael, the man one mitzvah and the woman another mitzvah. The man, the mitzvah is what? Is milah. You remove the foreskin that detaches him from the representation of the Ra, of the Eitz Hadas. Chava, the woman, continually menstruates. So why is there something that, the Chaim asked this question, or Kodesh asked, so why is there something a woman should menstruate once in a lifetime and stop menstruating? So he explains, because Chava is the one who actually encouraged Adam to eat of the Eitz Hadas. So that's something she has to continuously contend with, month in and month out. She has a menstrual cycle. Adam, who was victimized to a degree, although he had Bechira, he had choice, he didn't have to, but since he didn't initiate the Eitz Hadas, therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him the tikkun that you remove that foreskin, and once it's removed, he's already in a position where he's in a state of Bechira, he's able to choose between Tov and Ra. That's the reason why a non-Jew, besides not called Adam, Atem Kriyim Adam, Heimlo Kriyim Adam, a non-Jew has no relevance to tiring mitzvahs or to growth, spiritual growth. The obligation is only, as I always mention, Emet Maral. If you take a look at all the Shev Mitzvah Noach, they're all negative commandments, except for Mishpotim. His responsibility is only to maintain the spirituality which he was given with at the time that he comes to its existence, and when he dies, he should return that state of spirituality, that it's not diminished or compromised or sullied with chet. That's his responsibility. But the whole concept of growth, of mitzvahs aseh, advancing, has no relevance to that. Odom, as the Maral says, is min Adam or the Malbim. It's from earth. It's all potential. Aseh, but even the Lavim, we have a negative commandment. There's so many subcategories of the Lav, but a non-Jew, because he has that Ra, he has no relevance to the subcategories, because he doesn't have the sensitivities that's needed, that you should not be in violation of all those subcategories. Now, he mentions over there's a famous medrash, which Chaim cites. There was a discussion between Rabbi Akiva and Tonus Tropis. He was the Roman governor who ultimately put Rabbi Akiva to death. And what was the discussion? Whose action is more perfect? Is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's action more perfect, or is man's action more perfect? So, of course, Tonus Tropis, the Roman governors, assumed that Rabbi Akiva would say that Hashem's action is more perfect. But Rabbi Akiva said, no, man's action accomplishes more perfect. So he was taken aback. He says, how can you say such a thing? He says, I'll explain it to you. A person plants a seed, a wheat kernel, wheat grows. And then the farmer, he harvests the wheat, he threshes it, he mills it, turns it into flour, turns it into dough, bakes a loaf of bread. What's more perfect? The loaf of bread or the kernel which grows out of the ground? No question. The loaf of bread is more perfect than the kernel. So he says, but why if Hashem God created man with a foreskin, what do you mutilate the child? What are you taking the foreskin off the child? So Rabbi Akiva says, you don't understand. Man was created imperfect, and it's man's responsibility to perfect himself. So removing the foreskin is like taking that kernel and actually turning it into something which is more perfect, which is loaf of bread. That's it. So the Or Chaim Kodesh has a question: why did Tonus Tropis get it? I mean, it's seemingly the lesson to be drawn from the bread is simple. Now, it's interesting. Before the Chet of Adam Rishon, or it says in Brochus that Losid Lovo, bread will grow directly out of the ground. The nusach of the bracha, when we eat bread, it's Hamotzi Lechem in Oretz. Bread comes out of the ground, straight out of the ground. That's at the end of time. Before Chet of Adam Rishon, the bread came straight out of the ground. It was fully developed. The whole concept of the various levels of processing, harvest, after harvesting, you have to thresh, because the whole concept of a husk didn't exist, covering, because all that's all part of the imperfection of existence. So just as the human being had no covering, there was no foreskin, the kernel everything was ready to go immediately. There was no separation between the end result and the actual product itself. You didn't have to do that. So therefore, as a result of that, it's similar. The foreskin is a covering. And I always mention the name of the Olas Ephraim, that just as there is a covering on the outer part of the body, there's a covering on the heart. And when you remove the covering, the outer covering, there's an orlas, he refers to orlas hapnim, there's an orla chitzoni, there's an outer covering, and there's an inner covering. When you remove the outer covering, that removes the inner covering. And that gives the child relevance to be able to have relevance to all the spiritual channels are open to be merit, siyata d'shmaya, to do avodas Hashem. That's what Bila accomplishes.